This has nothing to do with what I'm about to talk about, but do you guys see the Daigo video? This might be my favorite video of the whole last week. That's my goat. We have to protect Daigo. His smile must be protected. This is literally Daigo. So, ECT just wrapped up this weekend. This was the 4th CPT premiere of the season, and it was won by longtime fan favorite slash grappler hero slash, if you didn't know this, Virtua Fighter legend, Itabashi Zangief. So Itazan has now secured his spot at Capcom Cup after a tense grand finals against IDOM's Manon. And of course, because this is the internet, it took all of 15 seconds before the usual tier talk started. So for context, let's have a look at the current lineup of qualified characters for Capcom Cup. So, you'll notice we have 2 Zangiefs, 1 Cammy, and 1 Ryu so far. There's not that many offline events this season, but we are now about halfway through. So this also comes in the wake of a small balance patch that saw Zangief get nerfed. If you don't know, just a quick summary, Gief's headbutt combos now do less damage, and his hop kick was made punishable again if you misspace it. It's now -4 point blank. So, is Zangief still a top tier threat? Was Nemo right all along about the grappler menace? Before we get started, you guys should hit that subscribe button. I don't have a funny skit today, I just think it would be good to do that. Anyway, let's get into the video. By the way, just a tangent before we start, but I thought this was really funny. While Itazan was busy winning this tournament, Nemo was at home streaming and having a mental breakdown. Nemo is not a fan of Zangief, as we know. So this is what Nemo was doing while Itazan was busy winning. Nemo was just sitting in silence on his stream, endlessly replaying an interaction of Hopkick beating Blanca's level 1. This is not, by the way, I should point out, this is not like a looping 1-second clip. This is a 57-second long clip. You can see the light leave his eyes in 480p. This man is going through it right now. Nemo is known for his intense hatred of Zangief. Anyway, here's the question. Why is Zangief so well represented in Capcom Cup qualifiers so far? Is he broken? No. Obviously not. I think that the 2 main components to this that are important to go through, and they go beyond stupid-ass tier lists. So, number 1, the players. One bad habit we in the FGC have when it comes to talking about results is that we tend to completely ignore the person behind the sticks. So the 2 Zangiefs we have right now are Mena RD, a strong candidate for the best player in the world right now, multi-character specialist. He won Evo Japan with Blanca and Luke, and Itazan. A guy who has been playing Zangief since before most of the people watching this video were even born. Both of these players are long-time tournament professionals with dozens of majors won over the years, and I think that should be considered regardless of character choice, right? That's number 1. Number 2, and I think this is potentially the most important factor, and this is going to be like the thesis for this video. This goes undiscussed a lot. I think matchups are infinitely more important and more informative than tier lists in competitive fighting games. And I think understanding Gief's matchup spread this season is the key to understanding his success. So here's the thing. Gief has, right now, a very solid matchup spread going into most of the top tiers. So when we think of the best characters in the game right now, which characters come to mind? Maybe Rashid. A lot of people believe Rashid's one of the best right now. Let's take a look at Big Bird's matchup chart. So this is courtesy of the Bird's YouTube channel. You guys should all go and subscribe, by the way, just a reminder. So as you can see right here, Big Bird believes that Zangief has a advantage, or it's a disadvantage for Rashid, advantage for Zangief. So, I mean, Big Bird's one of the best Rashid players in the world, so I tend to trust his opinion more than the average Joe. Let's consider a couple more of the top threats in this game. The final bosses of the Shoto archetype, Ken and Akuma, two characters that have been dominating since they came out. So I sent a DM to Angry Bird, Evo champion and all-round nice fella. I asked Angry Bird what he thought of the Zangief matchup for both Ken and Akuma, because he plays both. And funny enough, when I DM'd him, he actually said that he'd just been talking to Itazan about the same thing. And he told me that Itazan thinks that Zangief beats Ken this season, and Angry Bird thinks Akuma Geef is fairly even, but he said it's scary since there's like so little room for error with Akuma. Like if Geef gets one successful fireball jump, the Akuma player just explodes. Generally speaking, even going even against Akuma is a big deal. Like 5-5 is nothing to sniff at. So these are some examples of Geef having solid matchups into the top tiers. But let's look at the other end of the spectrum, okay? Who does Geef lose to this season? Like, which characters cause problems for Geef players? Now, this one's much easier to answer. There seems to be two characters that every Geef player has nightmares about. The first of which is Dalsim. So this is the current matchup data, the most recent one we have, courtesy of Cat Cami, pulled from all ranked matches over 1900 MR. So this should be pretty representative of like high level play, generally speaking. I don't generally like using ranked data to support matchup arguments because matchup data from ranked tends to produce weird results. Like as you can see here, if we go off matchup data, then Dalsim is the best character in the game with the best matchup spread and the most like consistently winning matchups. So usually I would avoid using this to try and prove a point, but there is one interesting data point here, which is this right here. So in the high level matchups, Zangief only manages to have a 39.2% win rate against Dalsim, which is so far outside of the average that it kind of, you can draw some conclusions from that. Like a lot of matchups you'll notice here are like 50%, 51, 52, maybe as high as like 55, 45. There's a bit of variance, but most kind of trend towards 50-50. But this, I think this is the single worst matchup in the game, according to this data. Like, so yeah, there's one or two other matchups with similar numbers around 39%, but this is pretty much tied, roughly, for the worst matchup in the game, going off the ranked data, and it's not hard to see why, you know? Even historically, you know, Dalsim can just completely stop Zangief from approaching, and even in previous games, Dalsim has always been a problem for Zangief. That's one of those, like, archetype problems in Street Fighter in pretty much every game. So, the second matchup I see Geef players losing sleep over, besides Dalsim, is Lily. Most Geef players agree that Lily is also a big problem for Zangief. So I dug up a matchup chart for Zangief provided by Quiggy, one of the UK's best Zangief players. And Quiggy thinks that Lily is definitely one of the worst, but also in the replies underneath, we've got Veggie, who is probably the best Zangief player in Europe right now, I would say, who says, it's a good list, but personally I find both Sim and Lily to be 3.5, 6.5 matchups. So there is mostly consensus across the Geef community that these two matchups are a huge problem. So, what does this all mean? Zangief's worst matchups are characters that generally disappear in the later stages of a bracket. This is the really important point. So once again, we got some more Cat Cami data for you guys. This is the current representation across all CPT World Warrior events so far. How many times each character has appeared in a top 8 specifically. And you'll notice something. The characters that I just listed as being Zangief's worst matchups, Dalsim and Lily, are both in the bottom 6 in terms of representation in a top 8. So as long as you're strong enough as a Zangief player to avoid losing in the early phases of a tournament, like in pools, your likelihood of running into bad matchups starts to decrease as the bracket goes on, and your likelihood of encountering good or even matchups in top 8 is actually fairly high. I asked a bit about the Cami matchup. I asked Hurricane, and he thinks that Cami Geef is 5-5. As we said, Ken is either even or slightly in Geef's favor. Not sure about Bison. Akuma is even or slightly in Geef's favor. There's a couple of outliers here. I would say that like JP and Ed are probably Geef's worst matchups out of the stronger characters. But across all of like, you know, the top sort of 10 here, most of them are either even or Geef's favor, which is a really important thing to have. So I think this is the core of the issue. This right here is why I think we need to think more about matchups rather than tier lists. Because Zangief is definitely a strong character this season, like don't get me wrong. But personally, I don't think he's even top 5 right now. But I do think a lot of his tournament success comes in part due to him having this specific matchup spread. Okay, so just quickly to wrap this up, I think it's also worth looking at an example of the inverse situation. Aki. Now I play Aki, as you guys probably know. I think she's extremely strong this season, but I've seen a lot of people talk recently about how Aki's results haven't really kept pace with the crazy buffs she received in Season 2. Like, you can see Aki down here, one of the least represented characters in top 8 so far. Obviously, part of this, I have to be honest, is just a skill issue on my part. Like, I'm not, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm playing Aki flawlessly and there's no room for improvement. There's definitely a skill issue happening here. But I do think that Aki's relative underperformance in global statistics comes down to the exact same factors as Zangief's relative overperformance. So while Zangief has good matchups into a lot of the top tiers, Aki has the opposite. Personally, I think Aki's worst 2 matchups this season are Kami and Akuma, and those characters are everywhere this season. Like, if you make it into a top 8, statistically speaking, you are very likely to have to fight one or both of these characters to win, sometimes multiple. I've had plenty of runs this season with multiple Kamis and multiple Akumas in my way, and that can be a very tough hurdle to overcome. Likewise, I think Aki has good matchups into a lot of the weaker characters in the game. Like, I think Aki beats Jamie, I think Aki beats Kimberly, I think Aki beats Dalsim. But these characters are rare to encounter in the late stages of a bracket. So the benefits of beating these characters are rarely exploited. So yeah, it's not just tier lists. I think matchup lists are infinitely more useful, infinitely more instructive, and give you a better understanding of why certain characters might under or overperform relative to just a tier list. But that's just what I think. How do you guys feel about Zangief this season? And more broadly, what do you think of the topic of like matchups versus tier lists? Let me know down in the comments section, and I will see you guys all in the next video.